When I went from newspaper work to television work in '62, it was horrendous suddenly being on camera. I don't know why, but before that, as a columnist, you often do television. You never bothered me. But then suddenly when I went to Pittsburgh to KDKA, maybe because it was suddenly the job, but oh my God, the nervousness. I used to get lumps in my throat. I used to get out of breath. I couldn't get the words out sometimes. It was the most difficult period I can remember. And that really lasted an awful long time. And wasn't as severe, my nervousness, as it was in the beginning. But I got to a point, and really it must have taken about 11 years, I think, of being on KDKA. And I was on a hell of a lot. It was an hour a day with my talk show. I was co-anchoring the new news. I had begun the evening news with two other anchors. And finally, I reached a point where after about 11 years, I guess, it was like a whole reversal. I suddenly became so comfortable that to this day, if I'm not on television, say for a period of 2-3 months, it doesn't matter. I go on and I'm just like I am in my own living room. It's interesting. It's just like you reach a point where suddenly the nervousness is all gone.
Took 11 years for that?
11 years, which was very discouraging. I don't mean to say that I wasn't comfortable here and there,
right.
But I always had that nervousness before going on. I don't have that anymore. I really don't. Nowhere, whether I'm doing something on location, whether it's in a studio, it's just, I don't know what it is. If it's maybe self-confidence suddenly, knowing that I can do it. I don't know what happened suddenly to make that big difference. But I can remember some terrible nervousness, incidents of nervousness. I remember once during a taping with a policeman who was being interviewed by me because his hobby was photography and he'd won some awards. And when you're nervous, you don't really listen. You don't pay attention so much. You don't concentrate on your own questions as much either. And I said to him, do you do any moonlighting? At the end of the taping, he said, no, like almost surprised. And I can understand why he responded that way. But at the end of the taping, the floor manager said to me, do you know what you said? I had said, do you do any moonshining? No wonder he was a little taken back, the poor policeman. Oh, I did terrible things.
Well, I can imagine in all those years you must have had, everybody has their stories about the bloopers and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
What about the good parts of it, though? What were the highlights of being on that long,
Oh, gee, the good parts. Well, there's one thing that I've always, I'm very proud of. I think I'm a very good interviewer. I really am. And I think one reason for it is that, I do my homework. Days when there was a good deal of civil rights activity. And I can remember interviewing black leaders in Pittsburgh, and I found in many cases in their interviews, they got very, accuse them of being racist. Always accuse them of one thing or another. I never permitted that. I can remember talking to some of these black leaders, and they would say things to me like, and you go home to your lily white house. Well, I would challenge that. I say, why are you saying that to me? Why do you say lily white house to me? Aren't you being racist when you say something like that to me? I remember one time with Muhammad Ali. In fact, he couldn't believe it, the fact that I was accusing him of being racist. He laughed in disbelief. And I brought out the fact that he had refused to make a picture with a white woman because there was a little bit of intimacy involved, and there were other things that he would not do because of the color of the people with whom he had to work. And he still couldn't understand that I would interpret those things as his being racist. Finally, I had I really challenged him. In fact, he called me he said, "You're the female Howard Cosell," which is a horrible, horrible honor. Um, but anyway, we ended by saying, I said to him, if I were black, I said, would you be a friend of mine? Well, he said, if you were black, he said, I think I would invite you to dinner. He was a very good interview, though. Excellent interview. It's interesting that it's not necessarily the bright, good individual who is the good interview. Sometimes you're really surprised, those people who are the good interviews. And the bad ones. I can remember interviewing Montgomery Clift at Sardi's restaurant, and he was such a nervous person. And about every 10 minutes he'd say, look, I'm really not a good interview, apologizing to me. And I said, well, you let me worry about that. Just talk to me. I wouldn't, when I was interviewing for the newspaper, I would never take out a pad and pencil, or not so that it was discernible to the subject. I would always keep it in my lap under the table. And well, some of the notes came out very strange, but I would just make very brief notes to myself while they were talking, and always looking in their eyes. Because once they saw me looking down on a piece of paper, making notes, they'd freeze sometimes. They wouldn't be themselves. And I tried on television to make the guests equally comfortable by talking to them a little bit before and listening. It's amazing. And when you look in people's eyes and you do listen to them, they are themselves. They say things to you that they would not say otherwise.
That's really true, isn't it? You learn that right away, that if you really listen to people, most people don't ever get listened to.
They don't.
And they're willing to talk. We were talking about that last night.
They really do. They really give you, people point to the Mike Wallace school of interviewing, which is the interrogator. Well, I think I got, well, and certainly in the history of my interviewing, I got, many more penetrating questions and intriguing answers in a different way. I mean, I didn't do it through the interrogation thing. But just by letting people feel comfortable and showing an interest in what they're saying and bringing them out more, they admit the damnedest things to you. I think perhaps I may have mentioned to you off camera about Germaine Greer once. Why, she got herself really boxed in when she talked about how her husband left her and her mother didn't want her. And I said to him, my God, you poor thing. I said, you're starving for love. And she really got shook up. I mean, I touched a raw nerve. What do you mean? And so, of course I'm loved. But she was suddenly stuttering, and she was just shaken, really, by being told something like that. I find a good interview is almost a good therapeutic session, I think, for some people. If you can draw out the things that they feel innermost.
Well, where did you think you get that? I mean, I don't have a lot of questions to ask you. Where do you get that? I mean, that whole sense of wanting to know about somebody and feeling that's your job. I mean, that's what you've been doing all these years.
It's a very interesting question. I really don't know. I don't know. Until I was 16, I thought I was going to go into business and be a secretary bookkeeper. Isn't that a horrible thing to become? And maybe because I always did some work for my father, who had his own business. I used to keep the books for him, and I did some typing for him. So maybe it was a natural thought that this was what I was destined for. I don't know. At 16 in high school, they had a practice of putting students with averages of 85 and over in English in journalism English classes, because there weren't enough students going out for journalism. That's what happened to me. I was put into a journalism English class, much to my horror, because the teacher was an ogre. I mean, he had a reputation for being a terrible person. I was so frightened when I got in his class. And here the class was seated that first day, and he walked in. He wasn't a tall man, but he always stood straight and tall. And he had small, beady black eyes and a pointed nose. And he walked in with some books under his arms and plunked them down on the desk and looked out at the class. And he said, all right, he said, any of you who don't want to be in my class, get out and get your class changed. Well, we all shook up, and so was I. And I thought, oh God, I wanted so much to get out of there, but supposing I walk out and then I find I can't get my class changed and I have to come back in here, it's going to be hell for me. He said, my trouble is I'm always thinking ahead. And so I stayed. Well, it turned out to be the experience of my life because, through that experience, my whole life took a different direction. He was tremendous. He was faculty advisor of the school newspaper. He had been a reporter in Philadelphia and a very dedicated person. I started to do some work for him. And he was very tough, sure, but only with those students who didn't do what they were supposed to do. I did. And eventually I became editor of the school paper, and I had such an incredible experience with him. I mean, he let me do things like get out of the school to do interviews. He sent me to interview people who were like sports columnists for the Daily News and the Daily Mirror at that time. I remember interviewing actors like Boris Karloff while I was in high school. It was great, really was. I had such a great time with him that I honestly considered flunking my final exam so I can stay over another year. I just loved the experience there. I just, being editor of the school paper and stuff. Anyway, I got the first journalism medal the school gave. There wasn't one until I came along. And so I
created it for you?
Yeah, wasn't that nice?
That's great.
So anyway, I just felt that was to be my life. But before I was going to start at NYU the following September, and I thought I should get a copy girl job to find out in the summertime if this was for me. And I could have gone to Philadelphia through a contact of this teacher, Dr. Sirota. I could have gotten a job as a copy girl at the Philadelphia Inquirer. But my mother said, oh no, you're not going to be off on your own at 18 in Philadelphia. So that meant I had to concentrate in New York. And I did. And I went from one newspaper office to another. Never got past the receptionist. I never felt so lonely in my life as finishing one of those job hunts along about 4 or 5 o'clock of an afternoon and being, so let's say, the lower part of Manhattan. That's all right. Well, I could have gone to Philadelphia to work as a copy girl during the summer, but my mother said no, I was too young at 18 to be on my own in Philadelphia, so I had to stay in New York and look for work. I went from one newspaper office to another, and I did this every day. And I can remember along about 4 or 5 o'clock getting through with my, making the rounds of the newspaper office. I would be going home, and I would be among these crowds of people. And I can remember feeling so lonely, only because I felt, my God, these people are going to and from jobs, and I don't have a job. It wasn't as if I didn't eat or couldn't be housed because I lived with my parents, but it was so important to me to have a copy girl job. I can't tell you, it was the most important thing in my life. Finally, along about August, and why I was still looking, since in September I had to start at NYU, I got up one morning and I said, this is it. I'm going to get a job today if I have to go to the editor's home, and I really meant it. So, as usual, I went with my big scrapbook of high school clippings, my journalism medal. I went to the New York Post, where I had been many times before. And I noticed that when I was sitting in the receptionist one day, that behind the receptionist's desk was a stairway that led right into the city room. And I thought, boy, if I can find the origin of that staircase, I can go right into the city room, bypass the receptionist. So I get to the lobby, and there is an elevator starter, and I asked him where the staircase was. He says, use the elevator. I said, I'm allergic to elevators. I have to use a staircase. And he looked at me peculiarly and told me that it was on the outside of the building. I found it, look up, and lo and behold, I'm smack in the middle of the city room. And if you don't think it's a scary feeling, here I am, 18. I was just standing straight, frightened as can be. All eyes are on me. And one person after another comes up, wanting to know what it was I wanted. And I kept saying that I had to see Ed Flynn, who was the editor, and that it was a personal matter, which is pretty stupid for an 18-year-old to say she had to see an editor for a personal matter. Anyway, Mr. Flynn's secretary came over finally, and she knew what it was I wanted. She directed me to the receptionist area and gave me another application. They had about 4 or 5 of mine on file. So from there, I walked to the New York World Telegram. And on the way, I figured, now, I better have a story. And this just occurred to me. I had a friend who worked for Who's Who in America, and I thought, I'll say I'm from Who's Who in America. I knew the names of all the editors of the newspapers. So I get there, and there's a male receptionist. And I told her I was Marie Torrey from Who's Who in America, and I was assigned to interview Lee B. Wood. And he said, you just can't walk in like that to see Mr. Wood. You have to have an appointment. I said, well, can I make one now? And he said, well, wait a minute. So he called up the secretary. He hangs up the phone. He hands me a piece of paper. He says, write your questions on this, and we'll see what Mr. Wood answers them. Well, that would have meant that Mr. Wood would dictate the answers to his secretary, and she would send them out to me, and I would never see him. I said, I'm sorry, but we don't do business that way. I have to see him personally. So he calls up again. When he hangs up this time, he looks at me suspiciously, and he says, hey, are you by chance looking for a job? And I practically coughed at that point. I said, I have a job. I'm with Who's Who in America. Well, he said, if I wanted to wait, Mr. Wood would see me. Then the nervousness set in. I never was so nervous in my life. By the time the secretary came to direct me inside to Mr. Wood, my knees were just shaking. I don't know how I made it along this long hallway to the office. When I got in there, Mr. Wood was finishing a morning conference on the first edition with all his department heads. And he acknowledged my presence in the office, sort of motioned for me to sit down, said, be with me in a moment. When he dismissed his editors, he called me over, and I tell you, I was so scared that my voice was all up here. I couldn't talk any better than that. And I said to him that I had to confess to him at that point that I was not from Who's Who. I was looking for a copy girl job. Well, he looked at me and then burst out laughing, which was great because at least it made me feel more comfortable. I thought he was going to say, get the hell out of here. So he looked at my scrapbook. He saw the medal. He said, to tell you the truth, he said, we don't usually hire copy girls, we prefer copy boys. In fact, we only have one. He said, but I'll tell you what. He said, I'll give you an application. He said, you send to me personally, and when there's an opening, I'll send for you. Well, I walked out of his office, so pleased with myself for having done this. I felt that now I could enjoy the remainder of the summer. I felt that I had done everything possible to get a job, and the fact I didn't have it was not my fault. At least I was at peace with myself for the first time. So I started NYU in September, and the following November, early November, I came home from classes one day, and my mother said that the World Telegram had called about a job. I quickly phoned back, and yes, there was a job, and I had to go in the next morning, which I did before going to classes. Then the problem was they wanted me to work full-time. Well, I don't want to quit college. So I begged them to put me on part-time until the end of the semester. And I remember when Today Show, and I thought she was dreadful then, I still do. But anyway, I remember asking someone, what do you think of Jane Pauley? And he said, gee, for someone who's 25 years old, doesn't she have a lot of poise? Well, that's a hell of a thing. I mean, do you tune in the Today Show because one of the 2 leading interviewers has poise, or because she's a good interviewer, knows what she's talking about? This is what I mean about the people. I'm appalled that they don't demand more from these TV people. And until they do, the executives are going to go on hiring people like Jane Pauley, a Sandy Hill. I mean, that was Sandy Hill, on the Good Morning America show. I mean, it was the kind of thing where you say to yourself, I can't watch because I have diabetes. I mean, she was so damn coy and sweet that it was vomitous. I find there's another woman on that show, though she's not going to get the job permanently, is Pat Collins. oh my God, it's such studied sweetness. It's just disgusting to me. Anyway, she's going to be, Joan London has the job, apparently, who is, I think, a cut or two above some of the others. She's attractive, and she seems to know her business, and she seems eager to do a good job. She happens to be very attractive, which is a plus nowadays, because when it comes to the women, especially in television, they've got to be young and pretty. Do you realize that no woman really will get to be as old on television as a Walter Cronkite or an Eric Sevareid?
Doesn't seem possible that they would put those images on, right? I mean,
doesn't seem they would put women.
A 70-year-old or a 65-year-old woman.
No, they wouldn't.
Right?
They really wouldn't. I mean, people point to Barbara Walters, who is she's probably about 50 now. But of course, I mean, she's an exception, and the exceptions do, after all, prove the rules. But she was doing it for a long time, and she is a very aggressive person. So I mean, she'll have a job for a long time yet. But otherwise, you're not going to find any anchors. Well, she's not doing any anchoring work either.
Right.
You're not going to find any anchors, female, who are Walter Cronkite's age. That's not to detract from Walter Cronkite. I still think he's tops. I watched the convention coverage, the Republican convention coverage from Detroit, and my God, he was so far and above everyone else. I was amused in that, during the convention, Dan Rather was a floor reporter. My God, was he sick beside Walter Cronkite. He looked so bad. He was wordy. He didn't get to the story. He wasn't sure of his facts. And Cronkite was just great. I'm sorry, I'm watching cable news television, and something like a firecracker dropped from the ceiling and apparently surprised everybody. This must be the floor manager who suddenly walked onto the set. Isn't that wonderful? Well, now that's live television. That's great.
You were talking about their technical problems.
The technical problems on cable news
right.
is, my God. See, what they've done is they don't have very much money, apparently, not for such so extensive an operation. And they've put a lot of whatever they have, I guess, into some of the top people, like Daniel Schorr, Bill Zimmerman, Bernard Shaw. On the technical side, they must really have amateurs. During the convention, Daniel Schorr and Bill Zimmerman, who were co-anchoring, could not be heard. I mean, it was like every third or fourth word that you got. But the background noise was so overwhelming that it just drowned out everything. I just couldn't watch and hear. Even the floor reporters, the same problems. I find that when the anchors on cable news throw cue to someone, say in New York, like one of them did the other day, and said, and now to Mary Alice Williams. And it wasn't Mary Alice Williams, it was an Oriental woman who said, I'm Joanna Lee or something. And a little bit annoyed, but they don't seem to know what is happening. On the Richard Queen, one of the three American hostages in Iran, when he arrived in this country, he went to the State Department. They had to interrupt that coverage 3 times, either because of no picture or no sound or both. And finally, the last time that they got back into the story was when Richard Queen just finished his speech, and all we heard was the applause for that speech that we did not hear. Fortunately, there was a news conference afterwards, so we were able at least to get some idea of what he experienced and what he feels and so forth. But this happens very often, that they don't get the picture whenever they move to another location. And I think that certainly the big priority for Ted Turner is to just reorganize that whole engineering staff and get some pros, get some people who know what they're doing. I wouldn't be concerned about getting names like a Daniel Schorr, because I don't think Daniel Schorr means a hell of a lot. I'd be more concerned about getting people who are pros. I mean, I think that the cable news should emphasize the fact that it's going to go after news and do it in depth and do it in an investigative way. I would get rid of the co-anchors. They have the pretty man and woman as co-anchors. They have teams of them. They look like figures on a wedding cake. Who needs it? You really don't, especially when you're moving as much as they do in the various locations. You just need one good person there at a time who just sort of takes over and cues to the various stories. You don't need this husband and wife team practically that most other stations do have. I don't know how we started on that man and woman, unless it was because of the women's movement and they felt that they had to give representation to women. So then just have a female anchor, then that's all on occasion, just as you might have for a man. But I don't buy this team business. I really don't. There it is then, I see. Now both of them are interviewing this woman. I don't know who she is because the sound is down. But it also puts the onus on both of them to ask questions, and some of them can be pretty inane. I remember one of the interviews they were doing was with a sports person, and they made light of the fact that the woman didn't know some of the terms, the female anchor didn't. Well, so what? Who cares about that? I don't think that should take up any good news time. And so here again, she was in that questioning period only because she was the female anchor. Well, it's unnecessary. So I would like to see it done more like they do in London. I think it's great, the news there. First of all, the people are real. They behave like real people, not this phony sweetness that we get, or the happy talk from some of these television news people in the States here. They deliver their news straight, no nonsense. They look good, they're plain spoken, and this is what I'd like to see in news here. Some honesty, some courage. It takes courage to really do investigative news. Courage on the part of the station or network, the reporter. But I think we're living in times where it's very important for the public to be informed. And something like cable news can do so much. I mean, it could really be a major contributor to an informed public. I think only when people are really informed can they make the right decisions, can they make the right protests, or approve in the right way. I don't say you must only speak up to knock something down, but also you should speak up when you think something is right and say so you can encourage more good things. But again here, I find that through television, people just don't respond enough. There is really an apathy, which is too bad. I find it increasingly so as we go on. People seem to feel, well, what good is it? So I call or write to a station or network. I'm just one person. Well, the trouble with that idea is that it overlooks the fact that this country is made up of the millions of small voices, and if enough people do register their attitudes, their opinions, it gets things done. You really do. I have no use for people who say, for example, I'm not going to vote in the coming election. Well, what are you proving by that? I mean, you're abdicating, really. You've got to take a stand. True, we don't have much of a choice sometimes, but you got to pick the lesser of two evils. What are you going to do? That's the way it is. But maybe that's wrong too. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. You say, if enough of us really made ourselves heard, that is so important.
This is the largest non-voting election in our history.
That's right.
As a matter of fact.
That's right. That's right.
That's some kind of a message.
That is, and I'm not here. It's not a matter of blaming you can't blame the system for this. You can blame the people. I think they're being very short-sighted, very stupid. Really, what are you proving by that? By abdicating, what are you proving? It's the old story of cutting off your nose to spite your face. You really are, because in the final analysis, it's the people who are going to vote. And boy, when people really do all that has to be done to protest, they get results. Boy, I've seen it happen. And it's great when you do see it happen. I've seen it right here in my own neighborhood. We have 2 parks right here in Tudor City Place. a man owned by a man who is a real estate mogul, Harry Helmsley. He wants to build apartment buildings on it. The tenants in the various apartment buildings here in Tudor City Place have not only formed an organization to combat this, the building of apartment buildings here, but they have succeeded in getting the city to come up with a solution. That is, they will give Helmsley another property to leave this area alone. And this is what this is just a small group of people from this area who have done this, and only because they have worked at it and they're determined. And my God, if you translate this kind of action into the country at large, you can move mountains, you can do incredible things, but you gotta want to do it, you've got to work toward it, and be determined about it. But there is nothing people couldn't accomplish if they set their minds to it. Really nothing. I firmly believe that. Have you had enough, John?
And of course, television is one of the ways to get people to at least.
Television is an incredible way of getting people to do things. I mean, during the years that I was on KDKA television, it was just it was a mind-blowing experience. I mean, even some of the little ways. I remember once having a nutritionist on who said, women, if you really love your husbands, you wouldn't feed them steak more than once a year. And a few days later, I got a call from this young woman who said, "Oh, Miss Torrey, I wish you would call my mother for me, please, please. She's elderly and she's weak and she needs the protein from beef and she won't eat it. And she heard on your show that you shouldn't eat beef." Well, if you can do a thing like that, my goodness. But no, there's many bigger things that have happened.
Well, that only shows you the kind of responsibility that you have as a broadcaster.
You're right. It's a very great responsibility. And some people wear it very heavily and some don't. Some are very flip about it and couldn't give a damn. Really couldn't give a damn. And that's a shame, because I think people like that really should not be on television, because they're responsible for influencing too much. Also, it's such a precious opportunity to really make points, to score. But you got to be the right kind of person to do it. Now you can ask, well, who's going to determine who's the right kind of person? I don't know. All I know is that I shouldn't even say that too. I think I'm the right person. I really am, because I feel very strongly. I wouldn't do anything dishonest in terms of television or even the newspaper column. I know even though when there were people I interviewed that I despised, it never came through the column. I never put it in. And yet, I know some of my fellow columnists, my God, it was unconscionable, some of the things that they did. I can remember a columnist named Jack O'Brien, who is still functioning today, not in as big a way as he used to. He was with the Journal American. And he was responsible for the suicide of an announcer during the Red Channels period. But he kept day after day after day in his column, he kept hammering away at this guy and calling him a communist. And finally this man just couldn't take it any longer and he killed himself. That's horrible. That really is. I just hate to see something like that, because it's a thoroughly destructive thing, and you're giving a man like a Jack O'Brien license to push his prejudices and his orneriness, and really commit terrible things. Here a publisher knew what he was doing, but they couldn't give a damn. Journal American, I have to say, deserved to go out of business. It did many years ago. But I remember a remark by Jack Parr once I thought was just terrific. When he was talking about the editorial policy of the Journal American, he said, in a few words, he said it, me good American, you good American. I thought that said so much in just a few words about the Journal American.
That's great. Well, there's a lot more, obviously, but is there anything that you want to add?
Anything I want to add?
Just today, I know, you're right.
Well, with all my criticism, I do have great hope for television. I do think that it's still a relatively new medium when you consider it, against some of the other media. I do think that at some point we're going to see more in the way of conscience in it. I think we've got to. It's such a precious medium. As my husband used to say about it, it was true. It's the ultimate in sight and sound. I mean, it's the ultimate in communication. You can't do better than television. It's truly a window on the world. It really is. And I'd like to see more honest people involved in it. I'd like to see more responsible kind of programming. I would get rid of, well, most of, I would say as much as about 85 to 90% of television today is pure trash. And that's too bad. I mean, even public broadcasting is influenced by the commercial television, which is too bad. I think what they did with that story of the princess, about the death of a princess, that was a horrible thing. It was horrible because they kept circulating this film excerpt from that program, giving it to all the news departments at the networks, at the individual stations, which used it and made it seem as if this was the actual film of the event. I really thought that we were seeing the death of the princess and her lover. Instead, and it wasn't until the program went on PBS, the full program, did we realize that this was a movie production. That's what it was. And that was very dishonest of PBS to do that. Very dishonest, because it got the point across that it was the actual thing. And that's wrong. That's wrong. I fully disapprove of something like that. I'm going to shut up on you now, John.
That's a new kind of television, you can be on camera and don't have to say anything.
That's right. That's good, isn't it? I mean, you don't want a moment of silence. I saw an excerpt from a new movie on television. Rona Barrett was reviewing, what was it, this Angie Dickinson, was that Dressed to Kill? And she said that there was a glorious 8 minutes in that movie in which not a word of dialogue was spoken. And she showed us about a minute and a half from it, and it was Angie Dickinson sitting next to this man, and it was kind of an interesting scene. I have to say, Angie Dickinson never looked better. I've always had the feeling about her that she's dying to be raped. All right, are we focused on Richard Nixon on cable news? I wonder what that's about. Maybe we should put up the sound.
They're comparing handwriting.
Oh.
I don't know if I can say her name on the air. I studied with her for 2 years. In September of '74, she told me that 13 months prior to that, she saw tremendous pressure on Nixon's brain, physical, almost like a brain tumor. She told them, she said, "This is not for blackmail purposes. I want you to know that